Hi, this is Dr. Barry again, and today we're going to talk about other commercial property coverage options, which is from Assignment 4 or Chapter 4 of the CPCU text. Let's look at an outline for this discussion. We're going to talk today about alternative valuation methods, blanket insurance, and fluctuating personal property values. So these first three are really about valuation methods and setting limits. Then we'll look at the international coverage endorsements that are limited and some other coverage options. And finally, cause of loss forms endorsement options. So let's start with alternative valuation methods. These are endorsements that will alter the valuation method for certain types of property. And they include manufacturer selling price, functional building valuation, and functional personal property valuation. So let's look at when you might use one of these three. Let's start with manufacturer selling price. The normal building and personal property stock valuation method pays selling price less discounts and expenses not otherwise incurred for stock sold, not delivered. However, without the endorsement, if the stock has not been sold yet, it would not pay the selling price less discounts and expenses not otherwise incurred. This endorsement applies the same approach to stock whether or not it's sold. So let's look at an example. Assume Kim's Textiles has completed and is now storing a line of dresses that cost $20 per dress to make. Kim has sold 1,000 of those dresses for $50 per dress with free shipping, sort of a discount. Kim still has not sold 2,000 of the dresses that are completed. The warehouse where all the dresses were being stored burns and the dresses were all destroyed. Under the normal BPP, Kim would have received $50 less the $5 per dress shipping cost that she did not incur because she didn't ship the dresses on the 1,000 dresses that were sold, but only $20 on the other 2,000 dresses that had not yet been sold, or $85,000, which is $45 times the 1,000 plus $20 times 2,000. But with this endorsement, Kim will be paid $135,000 because she'll get $45, the cost of making the dresses minus the $5 expenses that she did not incur, times 1,000, because all the dresses will be valued the same whether sold or not. So you can see that for certain types of goods manufactured, this could make a big difference. It recognizes lost profit on items that were destroyed but not yet sold. From the insurer's standpoint, this must be carefully underwritten. The insurer has to make certain that this is different from business income coverage. In other words, if the insured has business income coverage, they have to make certain that the insured cannot collect for the same loss twice. It's especially good for, as in our example, clothing manufacturers. Now let's look at functional building valuation. This allows the insurer to replace or repair a building with less costly material. It can even be used for partial losses. The only requirement is that the insured must make the repairs within 180 days of the loss to get the functional replacement cost. It also eliminates coinsurance. It's good for older buildings where the materials needed to replace or repair the building are much less expensive today. In order to make the building functional again, the insured can use these much less expensive current and modern materials. If the insured had to insure the building at its replacement cost, the insured would have to carry a substantially higher limit. Similar to functional building valuation is functional personal property valuation. It provides functional valuation on personal property other than stock. If it's stock to be held for sale, then the insurance policy will not provide the functional personal property value. An example of where this can be used is an old computer system. Again, you must replace the property within 180 days to get the functional replacement cost. This is especially good for all forms of technology since the cost of these types of technology tend to go down over time. Now let's look at blanket insurance. It's an alternative to specific insurance. The definition of specific insurance is basically scheduling a specific amount of insurance or insurance limits for each building and personal property at each location. Literally, the insured would have a schedule listing all of the various properties to be insured, both building and personal property, and the specific amount of insurance for which it's to be insured. So if that property were to be destroyed, the amount the insured would get would be exactly that specific amount. With blanket insurance, there is only one limit of insurance for one or more types of property in separately rated buildings. Blanket insurance requires the insured to meet a 90% instead of an 80% coinsurance requirement. It doesn't give a 5% discount for carrying 90%, which specific insurance does. In other words, specific insurance only requires 80% coinsurance, but will give a 5% discount on premium if the insured carries 90%. So, with blanket insurance, the insured has to buy more insurance. Despite the additional premium, there are several advantages to having blanket insurance. It gives the insured significantly more coverage at one insured location. This is particularly better when values are fluctuating or difficult to estimate. So let's look at an example that illustrates the advantages of blanket insurance. Say an insured has an office building worth $500,000 and a factory worth $500,000. With specific insurance, the insured must carry $400,000 at each location. But with blanket insurance, the insured has to carry $900,000 total. As long as the insured continues to meet coinsurance requirements, they would have significantly more coverage at each location. In fact, they would have up to $900,000 of coverage. It also gives you additional debris removal coverage. Let's look at an example of that. Say the business has a $400,000 loss from a tornado and an $85,000 debris removal cost. They met the coinsurance requirement as illustrated above. With specific insurance, this insured would only have an additional $10,000 for debris removal since they had reached the $400,000 limit on the specific insurance they had purchased. But with blanket insurance, they would be able to cover the full cost of debris removal. They would have met the coinsurance requirement, assuming that the building was still worth $500,000, and the $85,000 debris removal is not part of the insurance to value calculation. So therefore, they would have the full $85,000 of debris removal coverage under blanket insurance. Now let's look at fluctuating personal property values. These are usually associated with inventory that varies significantly over the year. If the values are predictable over the year, you would use a peak season endorsement. But if not predictable, a value reporting form is better. Let's look at examples of both. Let's start with the peak season endorsement, and then we'll look at the value reporting form. But let me make one comment before we look at these. Without these endorsements, the business would need to over-insure most of the year in order to be fully insured. The peak season endorsement provides higher limits of coverage for specified time periods. It ensures additional coverage for times when needed for businesses that have seasonal fluctuations in personal property value. So for example, let's take summer recreational equipment and other items such as beach umbrellas and beach chairs. For these types of businesses, their inventory would be significantly higher before and during the summer season. If they didn't have the peak season endorsement, they would have to carry that higher limit and pay for that higher limit all year long. Similarly, businesses that stock and sell Christmas-related items and any other holiday-related items have seasonal inventory fluctuations. But now let's look at the value reporting form. This is another way to avoid over or under insuring. A limit is set high enough to cover the maximum expected values over the time period, for example, a year. As long as the property values are reported accurately and on time, the insurer will pay the full amount of loss. The way this works is that you have a provisional premium with the value reporting form. It's typically 75% of the annual premium. This is paid at the beginning of the year or period. There will be a premium due or a refund depending on actual property values. That is, of course, paid at the end of the period. So as you can see, if the insured is unsure of their inventory amounts needed over the year, they can pay 75% of what they believe will be the maximum, and then at the end of the year, if the values have been much less, they will get a premium refund. If they were 100% of what they expected, there will be some premium due. This is an excerpt from the textbook which explains value reporting form advantages and disadvantages. One of the primary disadvantages is that the cost to generate and maintain the reports with accurate property values can be very high for the business. But if the value of the property exceeds the policy limit, the insured may not have enough coverage, so it's important that they maintain accurate values. Now let's look at international coverage endorsements, and these are limited, as their title states. Limited in that they really are only partial solutions, and I'll address that in my explanation. First, there's the business personal property coverage under the international coverage endorsement. An example of when this would be used is when an insured has a trade show in a foreign country. For this endorsement to apply, the property must meet all three of these criteria. It must be temporarily in the foreign coverage territory, used in the insured's business in the foreign coverage territory, located at a business the insured operates, owns, or in the insured's care, custody, and control. The next example is property in the process of manufacture by others. Example of when this would be used is for smaller companies that sell to foreign countries but do not have ownership in foreign property. Let's look at what this is good for and not good for. It is good for covering raw materials and in-process goods while being manufactured in a foreign coverage territory. It's not good for covering merchandise held for sale, for property in transit, and for property being transported by another for hire, or for property in the premises owned or leased by the insured. None of these four things would be covered. Both of these endorsements base the valuation of the property on the domestic costs, even if they're replaced overseas. In other words, they'll base it on the US dollar, even if the insured has to spend foreign currency in order to replace the goods, which might mean that insured is underinsured. In some cases, these endorsements might be too limited. In those cases, an insured might consider purchasing a foreign master policy, which provides broader international coverage. It is coverage on a non-admitted or excess and surplus lines basis. It can be excess or surplus lines and difference in conditions. Difference in conditions means that it will provide coverage for things that other standard policies do not. Excess would be limits over and above other standard policies. This allows the business to maintain uniformity in coverage over both their foreign as well as domestic operations. Now let's look at the commercial property coverage forms, other options. And those are the additional covered property endorsement, a manufacturer's consequential loss assumption, the brands and label endorsement, and an increased cost of loss and related expenses for green upgrades. So let's look at additional covered property. The current edition of this endorsement is just a blank space for inserting whatever you want to add. An insured can add just about anything that was excluded in the commercial property policy. Some examples are wharves and piers, outdoor fences, docks, walkways, bridges, and animals. The manufacturer's consequential loss assumption pays for stock that is undamaged when other stock is damaged. For example, when the top of a dress is ruined by a covered cause of loss before it was attached to the bottom of a dress, the insurance covers the undamaged portion. There's also the brands and labels endorsement. An insurer has the right to resell damaged, salvaged property. Let's say that a purse manufacturer was storing its completed purses in a warehouse and the warehouse burned down. While some purses might have been completely destroyed, others might have just experienced smoke damage. And the insurance company, now having reimbursed the insured for the cost, has title to those items and can resell them. However, this can be a problem if the insured is concerned about the reputation of its brand. In other words, if the insurer is reselling these items and they have some damage, such as smoke damage, the insured might be concerned this might impact the reputation for quality of its purses. This endorsement allows the insured to do the following at the insurer's expense: to stamp salvage on the property and to remove brands or labels from the salvaged property. Lastly, there's the green upgrades endorsement. The first part of this endorsement pays the difference in the cost to replace a covered loss with more environmentally sound materials or methods than the original. The second part pays an additional amount for expenses. We'll look at that more in a moment. The third part extends coverage if the insured has business income or extra expense coverage for 30 additional days. So let's look at some specifics on the second part. It pays for waste reduction and recycling, design and engineering fees, certification and related equipment testing costs, and building air out and related testing. Lastly, let's look at the cause of loss form's endorsement options. An insured can add ordinance or law coverage. We'll look more closely at that. The coverage parts of ordinance or law coverage are coverage A, which pays for a reduction in the value of the undamaged portion of property. So for example, if a building is damaged and has to be destroyed, the rest of the building might now have a significantly reduced value. Coverage A will pay for that difference. Coverage B pays for the cost of demolishing the undamaged portion of property. So for example, if the top floor of a building burns and the ordinance or laws applying to that location state that the building must be torn down, Coverage B will pay for the cost of demolishing that portion of the building. Coverage C covers the increased cost to conform with new requirements. For example, if a new building codes state that the materials now used to replace a damaged building must be more fire resistive, which are more expensive, the ordinance or law coverage C covers that increased cost. Also, there is the utility service endorsement. This endorsement extends coverage to include damage to property described in the endorsement schedule caused by the interruption of service such as water supply or telecommunications or power supply to the described premises. Then there's spoilage coverage. Spoilage coverage can be covered in some cases under the utility services endorsement, because if there's a power failure, the resulting damage to food, for example, would be covered. However, the spoilage coverage endorsement provides broader coverage. It not only covers the spoilage resulting from power outage, but also from change in temperature or humidity caused by mechanical breakdown or mechanical failure of refrigerating, cooling, or humidity-controlled apparatus or equipment on the described premises. Lastly, there's radioactive contamination coverage. This endorsement provides coverage that the nuclear hazard exclusion would otherwise eliminate. Hospitals, medical clinics, educational and research institutions frequently use radioactive materials, so this would be available to businesses that have that exposure. And that's it for Other Commercial Property Coverage Options Assignment 4.